Folk life is made up of living cultural traditions. Music, dance, craft, and place can all play a part. Chad Buterbaugh is a folklorist who heads up the Maryland Traditions program at the Maryland State Arts Council. And I'd like to welcome you to Smarts.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
All right, Buterbaugh sounds like a pretty folksy name. Has a great, doesn't sound too, it has maybe some German roots there?
There's definitely some German roots coming from Western Pennsylvania.
Okay, yeah. But you're here in Maryland now.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, again, what folk life, I gave a quick little summary of it, but I want to talk to an expert on it. How would you describe, if you're talking about folk life, how would you describe it?
Well, the first thing I would say is that the true experts are in the field. They're the people who are doing the dances, singing the songs, making the foods, practicing the customs, and I'm just an amplifier. That's what folklorists do. I find them and I try to help them out, make them more visible.
Okay.
But some of the things you mentioned in your intro, like food, craft, etc., that's it. That's folk life, living cultural traditions that are still being practiced in certain communities. People tend not to go to school to learn these things. They learn them by word of mouth or by example, and it's just common practice in certain cultural communities.
Yeah, pretty fascinating, actually. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Maryland, some Maryland folk life traditions, and I don't know if you can even, focus on down to Baltimore County. Are there any, or is that all kind of mixed together?
Well, we could. Let's start in the Chesapeake Bay.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay.
So, before the European arrival, this was all Piscataway country, especially southern Maryland.
Okay.
So we still have Piscataway people and many indigenous people in Maryland who are still practicing traditional expressions and ways of living. There are the Nassau-Wawash people, the Akahannock people. The list could go on. When the Europeans arrived, we started getting our maritime culture growing and growing over the generations, and so we still have watermen working the water, oystermen, crabbers.
Right.
And of course, Maryland is also in the last maybe, 100 or 200 years, become home to people from a lot of other places through immigration. Right. Whether it's the older waves from Europe.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Any water town is going to have a great concentration of people from other cultures.
Okay. And I don't know how, do you have to go back hundreds and hundreds of years, or can you go back, for example, to Sparrows Point Steel Mill? That obviously had a great effect on the area and on Baltimore County.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're exactly right. Folk life is about the past, but it's really about stuff that's still happening today. Yeah. And a few years ago, some of our colleagues worked with the Sparrows Point community, where the steel mill had been shuttered in 2012. Yeah. And there were a lot of people there who still considered Sparrows Point home, but with the massive economic upheaval, weren't able to go home in a certain sense. Yeah. So Maryland Traditions partnered with UMBC to do an oral history project, which was archived and filmed and actually turned into a documentary called Mill Stories. That was done by my former colleague Michelle Stefano and UMBC producer Bill Shoebridge. Sure. It's online, and it just recounts people's memories of the home that was no longer available to them in the way that they grew up with.
So maybe you're kind of answering my next question, but why do you think it's so important to keep these folk life traditions alive and make them part of, things that people were doing 200 years ago? And as you said, they carry on. Maybe we're not aware of it exactly, but why is it so important?
Well, we have in Maryland a great arts community all around, and it's wonderful to have master ballet dancers and master violinists in the classical tradition, but at the same time, with all that, are all of these small communities around the state where people are practicing on a much more intimate level the traditions that truly mean something to them. I often say that a community might be just a brick wall. You could have lots of people in a community and it's like a brick wall and they hold together, but if you push a dry brick wall, it's going to fall over. Folk life is almost like the mortar in between the bricks. It's the thing that allows people to mark their own communities and identify themselves as themselves. Right. And it makes the community much, much stronger to share a certain form of song, dance, etc.
So I know you're working hard with the Maryland State Arts Council to help keep these traditions alive. Can you give me some specific examples of what the council's efforts are in that light?
Sure, sure. Well, we give regular grants through Maryland Traditions. One of them is an apprenticeship award where we pair 2 artists together, a master and an apprentice, to ensure that some form of folk life is carried on into the future. Folk life project grants, operational grants for organizations that are doing folk life activities.
Okay.
And our big event, which is coming up in September, is the National Folk Festival.
So now when you say national, you mean that's everyone. So it's being hosted here in Maryland then?
Correct.
Wow. Correct.
Yeah, it's going to be hosted in Salisbury between 2018 and 2020. And it's going to be several stages of traditional arts performers from around the country.
Wow.
One of those stages is going to be produced by Maryland Traditions and focus on Maryland folk life.
Oh, terrific. You can't give us a little sneak preview of one thing that we might see from the Maryland folk life aspect?
At the top of my head is going to be duck decoy carving.
Oh, of
and
course.
this is in a tradition that is arguably it arguably has its roots on the Lower Eastern Shore of Maryland. You can find it in Louisiana, around the Great Lakes as well.
But we claim it here in Maryland.
There's just such an incredibly strong historical precedent for this particular art form here.
Right, well, this sounds fascinating. So if people want to find out more about all the work that you're doing at Maryland State Arts Council, also about the National Folk Festival, they can go online.
That's right.
And find that. Okay. Chad Buterbaugh, great to meet you, and I wish we had a whole half hour to talk about all the work you're doing. It's fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm Carolyn Black-Sotier. This is SMARTS, the Baltimore County Arts and Culture Show.